we don't talk about kink. Why don't we talk about kink enough in our community? Is it because it's like, why not? It's a real question.
Yeah, I think that there's a strange dichotomy that happens wherein
to know your body, for your partner to know your body and you to know your partner's body is the most intimate thing that you can ever experience. And it's supposed to be a safe space.
Yes.
It's supposed to be a safe space for a beautiful thing to happen. It was, if you ride, you're a freak. That is far from the truth. If you ride, you're free.
I believe where the Bible is silent, we should be silent. Now, let's be honest, ladies. The more people that you sleep with, the less inclined a man is to be like, I'm about to wife her.
Kelly Rowland, a renowned R&B singer, and is now currently known for her hit role in Mea Culpa, produced by Tyler Perry, recently went on a podcast with host of Lovers and Friends to talk about a lot of lessons and things that she expects the audience to get from the movie when it first came out, but has a really, really good in-depth conversation about sex, intimacy that should be talked about more in conversations and settings like this. So let's talk about it.
Movie of seeing something fantastic that you're just not going to experience. Your neighbor's probably not going through this. But there's definitely takeaways from this that people can apply to their own life. What are some of the things and the themes that you're really proud, especially as a Black woman, that this movie brought up and is going to make a conversation?
Oh, I have not thought about that.
I mean, kink and therapy comes to mind for me.
Kink and therapy. You're right. That's definitely one. I mean, I think that more people are talking about therapy. I hope that it brings a conversation and more for it, for sure. And we don't talk about kink. Why don't we talk about kink enough in our community? Is it because it's like, why not? It's a real question.
Yeah, I think that there's a strange dichotomy that happens wherein it's the Bible Belt influence of you're not supposed to, but then also the pop culture influence of you're expected to be the freakiest, sexiest, most sexual. And I think nobody's really either.
Right.
And it's embarrassing to admit that.
Wow.
That's a good point.
Okay.
What do you think?
I mean, I think that a lot of things are taboo. They've kind of just like been like that.
Yes.
And I don't know why they still have to be. I think that if some people like want to like keep certain things like at bay and you don't want to talk about it, that's one thing.
But they don't talk about it with their partner.
But they don't talk about it with their partner. And I think that sometimes it's because you don't know what your partner's going to think about you, but it's supposed to be an intimate space.
Yes.
So I'd much rather be honest and then say, if you think I'm crazy or kinky, then so be it. You know what I mean? And it's just between you two. And that's why it's intimacy. And that's why intimacy is necessary. And that's why intimacy is important. And it just makes things like tighter of a connection. You know what I mean? Between two people. So yeah.
Can you provide?
That's kind of where I want to start in this whole conversation, because I think she brings up, of course, from the outside looking in, again, for everybody that's watching, if you aren't, familiar with this content, I'm a single guy, obviously having conversation with an individual 30 years older and has 30 plus years of marriage experience with his wife. And so this is something from the outside looking in is very intriguing to me, because this is something that I think is really prevalent in having conversations. Of course, in the Black community, we can go that specific route, but just in the conversations of sex, something that seems so known. Obviously, it's one of those things that's a lot of people know of, are aware of, social media trends. I mean, everybody has access to it nowadays in such different ways, but yet it's something that is refrained from being spoken about. And I think what she said about the Bible Belt influence and pop culture influence definitely plays a significant role. I can't tell you how many times I've been influenced as a single individual to think of sex in one way and then think of sex another way, either based off of pop culture influence or the lack of conversations that I think I was around regarding biblical understandings of it, how God sees it, things of those sorts. And of course, it's a lot different compared to what it once was. But I think that that's a really prevalent conversation, because the expectations are either outrageous or just simply maybe, I guess, in a way unknown because of how secluded and safe keep such a conversation is. And I think for me, hearing these thoughts is really beneficial, because now I'm able to kind of have more, I guess, in a way, encouraged to have more conversations like this and not make it so uncomfortable when it comes to encountering my future spouse, where this conversation would be prevalent. And instead of just assuming, now we can have some things to talk about, obviously, when the time and scenario comes.
Yeah, man. So this is actually really good. I'm gonna come at it from a different angle. All right, Sean, I'm gonna come at it from a different angle. As Sean was alluding to, if this is your first time here, first of all, welcome. So glad that you're taking the opportunity to watch. We're going to ask you to like and subscribe, right? Hit the notification bell. We're also will check back in with you at the end and ask you to do the same thing as a reminder. Also want to tell you we're Christians, so we spring forth from the Christian worldview, but we believe these conversations are happening in culture, so we need to have these conversations here. With that being said, Sean, let me say something to you that is interesting to me. It's interesting to me that these conversations are happening on these platforms as well as our platform, but they're not happening in church circles. And with them not happening in church circles, here's what a lot of the problem is. A lot of the problem is, Sean, is that we have came from a culture. We tried to create a purity culture in church. We spoke of that purity culture. That purity culture was mostly aimed at women being modest, giving no responsibility to young men. And then what we've done is we've made it taboo to have these conversations around sex. So we create this purity culture. Girls had to wear a purity ring. The whole onus was on the girl. The girl then, she gets older, she gets married to a man. He, in his instinct, wants to be with his wife. He wants to be intimate with his wife, right? He wants to, be close to her, connect with her, explore her, if you will. And the issue becomes is that she has been taught her whole life that her body somehow, in some way, shape, or form, was not to be viewed, looked at, and certainly there was not to be any kind of sex conversation. It was only meant for reproduction, and that was it. Turn the light off, pull the cover up, all this other kind of good stuff or whatever. So what we've done is, in my opinion, we have poorly set up people for failure when it comes to intimacy and relationships in marriage. So we've made it to where it's so difficult for them to even get to a point, man, where they could really genuinely enjoy their spouse. And I think that has been really probably one of the more challenging scenarios and situations. And I feel like the church stunted a lot of people with this, women in particular. And it also allowed for people to go out and get miseducated, if you will, in culture with porn and other things on both sides, both males and females. And so they turned to something that was a natural thing. And so instead of the church teaching, watch this, instead of the church teaching, Sean, that sex was God's ideal, God designed it, and that it is good. It is really good in the context of a relationship being a marriage relationship, a covenant. God's like, have at it. Let me show you. Hebrews 3, 4, and 6 says this: marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled. But fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Let your conduct be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have. This is Hebrews 13, 4 and 6, folks. This is what this scripture tells us, plain as day, just as sure as we're sitting here and speaking about it. The bottom line is that the marriage bed is undefiled. So, and if you've ever read the Song of Songs, right, you have to understand this whole conversation is about this man being connected and committed to the wife, the woman of his youth. He's talking about exploring who she is intimately, her body. He talks about parts of her body. He goes into detail about, his connection with his spouse and enjoying this connection. And we have somehow tried to turn people into these people who will never, ever get the chance to enjoy intimacy, man. I have to tell you, Sean, of all the years that I pastored and worked with couples too, one of the bigger challenges with couples is the intimacy issue. And it's a lot of times because, again, women have been shamed to some degree about their bodies, about how and if a man should explore their body outside of their just being hey, we just in general, we came together, we want to have a kid, so here's what we're doing. And that's that, right? There's no connection. There's nothing to it. That's where I think this whole scenario and situation could use a broader conversation, some broader teaching. And I think that as the church, as the people of God, that we should not so much of being kinky, but absolutely positively explaining the fact that God created sex and that sex is in fact good. That's why when people are doing the things they're doing, whether they're masturbating, watching porn or whatever, you elicit these feelings that are in you and you're thinking, well, where is this coming from if it wasn't already in me? It is already in you. But when you put it in the appropriate framework, then it becomes a healthy thing, right? Not the porn and not the masturbation. I'm talking about you having the desire for the person that you're connected to and married to. And we need to teach that more. We need to teach that God designed it and that it's fantastic and that it works in that space. A lot of people just simply will not have that conversation. So we've had to kind of platform these conversations in other spaces. Now, many churches have small groups and different things along those lines. They should absolutely positively have sessions like this where these conversations go on and they talk about it. And man, even to the point of bringing in professionals, like this lady who you're telling me that's interviewing Kelly is a type of sexologist, right?
Sexologist.
So she actually has a degree, right? And certifications in this and so on and so forth. So this isn't the kind of person who's just trying to be nasty. This is someone who understands, reproductive systems, all the other kind of good stuff or whatever. And the conversation needs to be around that, because let's be honest, Sean, let's just be honest. There's healthy sex and then there's unhealthy sex. And a lot of people are having a lot of unhealthy sex. Many of those unhealthy encounters are outside of the marriage bed. A lot of them are inside of the marriage bed because of how we were raised and the way that we view intimacy, right? So even so much so, again, we talked about it on another pod where people would just say, or women would just say a lot about their husband. He just wants to have sex. And for her, she's been told for so long, don't, and without understanding the context of what it would mean to be appropriate in a marriage setting. So it becomes difficult. It becomes a challenge for a lot of Christian women. And then I'll say this lastly, until we move on to the next point or conversation, man, let me say this to you. I've seen it, Sean, where it becomes a challenge like that. And then I've seen the complete opposite way, where people just go buck wild, like they lose their mind because they feel like they have been suffocated by this message for so long. And I would tell you that we need to start having more conversations around this. I appreciate them having a conversation. I don't know where Kelly Rowland stands. I don't know where this lady stands in terms of their faith.
Yeah, Kelly has had reports before of being a Christian and having her faith there. Now, in terms of like straight up saying, hey, I believe in the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus explicitly, I haven't found anything like that, but I haven't looked that deep. But she has mentioned before, how her faith plays a role in her life.
Okay.
And coming from the church and things of that sort.
The beautiful thing is you and I are having a conversation. We hope that somebody also, man, has the opportunity to get helped by the conversation that we're having here today. Maybe they never heard this. Maybe their church doesn't talk about it. And they're like, yo, two Christian dudes are on here talking about sex and intimacy and kink and all this other kind of good stuff or whatever. Of course, they're going to keep it PG-13. But the truth of the matter is that, Christians should have some of the best sex lives on the planet. Yeah. Straight up. Tell you the truth, man. God made all this to be enjoyed, man. And I think it's important that we know that.
Yeah. And so I kind of want to, before we move forward, I want to get your thoughts and obviously share as much as warranted. But like when you talk about the kink aspect of it, because that is something that a lot of Christian couples and married couples I've seen often, want to know of, like what is permissible, what is available in that space when you're married.
Yeah.
What are some of your thoughts to that?
You know what, man? That's actually a really good question. So let's look at this though first.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, okay? That way I'm just not giving an opinion.
Mm-hmm. And you can just share it because I'll bring it up on the screen as well. So
okay. Well, let me tell you the way that it is described, Sean, is in Wikipedia. I'm gonna give you Wikipedia. In human sexuality, kinkiness is the use of non-conventional sexual practices, concepts, or fantasies. The term derives from the ideal bend or kink in one's sexual behavior to contrast such behavior with straight or vanilla sexual mores or proclivities. It is thus a colloquial term for non-normative sexual behavior. Okay, so there's non-normative. So there's fetishism that's a part of this, right? Well, there's BDSM. They use all kinds of different things. Sometimes toys, whatever,
right.
Things along those lines might be incorporated in there. So your question to me was, and it's a good question. So for people who are watching, Sean, and for you in particular, I'm going to give you my opinion on this. Yeah. Now I'm going to let people chew the meat, spit out the bones on their own thing. I think that when we talk about this, I know she made mention of in the video that our culture specifically doesn't talk about kink very much because of Bible Belt and different things along those lines. But my explanation for that would be, Sean, is in some ways it takes you away from the connecting to the other person and makes you in many ways objectify the other person. So you can almost treat them as though they are not human in a certain way, and that they're just there for certain sexual fantasies, as they alluded to here. This is the definition: fantasies, right? Sexual fetishism, things along those lines. I think you got to be careful because BDSM, this could turn into like a really, and for people who don't know what BDSM is, it's a erotic practices of role playing involving bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, and sadomasochism. So if you don't know what those are, you should look those up, just for lack of the sake of time that we would have here to really dig into that. But I would say, Sean, that people want to be careful about diving into sex that moves into that space, because you can almost dishonor the person that you are with. You can almost turn that person into, again, an object and not a human. That's your spouse. So you don't want that person to feel objectified. Most women that I know don't want to feel objectified. Now, in their case, it sounds like, of course, she's being a sexologist. She probably runs in this. She probably approves of it. She probably talks about it. Looks like Kelly was interested in it. I know the movie.
She mentions, like, stuff in her sex life, and it seems like that's something that's welcomed in her marriage.
But again, it has to be between those two people.
Right.
I could tell you that I would be much more conservative regarding that. I think that it could, again, it could become a really difficult thing. Now, with that being said, I think to adults, to partners, to people, man, who are willing to sit down and have a conversation about what they like, what they don't like, that's great. But a lot of times what ends up happening, Sean, is that there are people, man, I saw a statistic this morning that 63% of women are asked to do things intimately that they don't want to do, but because it's their partner, they're saying yes to that. Yeah, I can send you that video. And so, I mean, man, so I know this to be a fact. Again, in my sessions with people, talking with people, there are a lot of people that, and mostly women, they're like, hey, I'm not comfortable with that. That's not some. Now there are some people like Kelly, again, who may be totally comfortable with that, but her and her husband, I'm assuming, have had that conversation. They've decided. I do think that all couples, you get married, I think that all couples, especially Christian couples, you should sit down, because you should enjoy your sex life, and it shouldn't be a burden to you. And you have to teach somebody what you want. People won't automatically know. And let's be honest, most of the people that are coming into these relationships now that are Christians, they've already slept with other people. And so they already have set up, established rules and preferences that they have, that they may try to project onto this other person. If they haven't slept with somebody, they've done enough porn watching, enough other things that they've had, taken the time to sit up and watch. And in the process, Sean, they've formed in their head, man, some pretty bad habits. And again, this is where somebody can feel objectified as opposed to love, which is where I personally would pump the brakes on the kink thing. That's not to say that there aren't people who like certain things, which I'm not going to mention on here, but I'm just saying, if those people agree to that, then that's beautiful. Any exploration that they feel. But once you start bringing in additional things, toys, all this other kind of good stuff, tying people up, all this stuff, for me, I'm super conservative. That wouldn't be something that I personally would be interested in. But for other people, if they feel like that's where they are, then hey, go for it. Because again, I'm going to appeal to the passage of scripture that I gave you, right? That talks to us about this very straight up ideal. And this Hebrews 13, it says, marriage is honorable among all, and the bed is undefiled. I leave it to those people, right? That's yeah. And so you see here is very clear, right? It says, for God will judge who? The adulterer and the sexual immoral. Well, how can you become an adulterer or sexual immoral? To be an adulterer, right, is to be sleeping outside of those relationships. To be sexual immoral is the same, right? To be doing that. But a lot of people have had some challenges. Now I follow a couple. They're great. They do sex coaching. They're Christians.
Awesome.
Dave and Ashley. I can't remember their last name.
Okay.
I follow them. Let me see if I can find them real quick. The Willises, Dave and Ashley Willis. They are really cool, man. Now, if you go on their podcast, it's called the Naked Marriage Podcast. They're Christians, solid Christians. You go on their podcast, man, they can go so much more deeper than where I could go. This is what they do for a living, but man, they sell products.
Wow.
They sell all that.
Wow.
So, but again, they're not going BDSM, but they do involve themselves in other toys, different things along those lines that some people might be interested in. But again, I do think it's up to those people in that relationship to learn how to have those conversations. And then, man, if a person tells you they're not comfortable with something, you guys got to be okay with that.
Yeah, you got to honor that. And I think that's kind of what I was picking up from the explanation and thoughts is, yeah, I know like there's just a lot of that weight of expectation. I think the last clip we're going to react to from this podcast, she's going to address some of that stuff from her own experience, Kelly, at least, and that stuff. And so it's going to be really helpful. But yeah, that expectation, man, it adds a weight. And, you know, when you brought up that stat, it's very believable because I think, you know, so much porn and movie scenes and all these fantasies, you're kind of coming in instead of trying to see, okay, what does this person like and how can I be of service to that, and vice versa. It's like, hey, I've got this fantasy of how I've always dreamt of what this would look like, and I want you, because you are my spouse, to fulfill that, and that's the only way I'm going to be satisfied. And so then that puts them in a bind where they have to either choose to step out of what they're comfortable with to satisfy the other person. And then that's when you say that becomes objectifying. That's not loving and that's not honoring.
And if I feel like I'm an object to you, then I don't feel any value to you, because objects you throw away when you get done with them. Right. And that's different. So, yeah. Yeah.
And so, you know, and I think from this conversation too, you know, they got into that conversation, obviously the kinks and things of that sort, toys and usage of it. And I think what I was hearing from that and along with what you were sharing is just if that's something that if that's a conversation that's had and both of you are welcoming to that, to trying it, to whatever it is, then that's your business. And that is completely okay. But the moment you start challenging that boundary that they've set, where they've stated to you they're not comfortable, that's when you start crossing that boundary, and that's not healthy.
Yeah. And or Sean, I think if you look at other people with the jaundiced eye and say, yo, why aren't you guys doing this? Well, maybe that's just not where they are. Right.
I like that.
And so same thing, right? It goes to, so I think that in general, okay, so let me say this to you. And this might rub some believers wrong, right? We probably already rubbed some believers wrong. But
they're
let me say this
they're
to you.
shaking.
Right. but let me say this to you. I believe where the Bible is silent, we should be silent. Now, yeah, where the Bible doesn't speak on a thing, we shouldn't speak on a thing.
That's good.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think that too many of us will offer opinions on that. Now, we might find a scripture that you could say, I believe this includes this. Okay. But I think that we need to be really careful. Let's say, for example, we don't see a scripture that specifically says, do not be gay. We do see that God gave people over to their lust, to their desires and things where God says, I don't approve of this lifestyle. Right. We see that in, what is it, in Romans? And
Romans 1
and Leviticus
18,
right?
19, something like
so
that.
We see that, but we don't see that word, but we see that it's intimated through that. Right. But in this particular instance, it just says that the marriage bed is undefiled. Then it goes on to give a definition of what is immoral sex. Anything that's outside of marriage. He made it plain. Adulterers and other sexual immorality.
Yeah.
But he says the marriage bed. So I think that those people, so check this out. If you believe that God has given you permission to do something, then you believe that. If you believe that you don't have that permission, then you believe that. And neither of those people should force that belief on other people, because I think it depends on couple to couple. But I do believe for both couples that there should be very hearty and very well-rounded and good discussions around sexuality, around sexual preferences, around lovemaking, around connecting, what that looks like, different things along those lines. Because again, man, I know that there are things that I hear people talk about and say, and that some of these people have sat in front of me, and man, I've had to keep a straight face, while they had these conversations with me, as their pastor. I was like, okay, hear the rest of this. And those are things, man, that I could clearly see that more than likely it was mostly the wife who was uncomfortable with the request of the husband. I did see a few times, I'll be honest with you, where there was a request from the wife to her husband, and he was like, I'm uncomfortable. And that was a challenge. But and again, Sean, I will say this. Here's where we mix all this up, is when we have premarital sex outside of God's plan, outside of God's will, and then we start bringing that into our marriage, having that as an expectation. Even for the people who waited, their mind didn't forget, neither did their body.
Yeah.
Their body didn't forget that encounter. So they're like, ooh, I cannot wait to get married. Whoop-de-wop, wop-de-whoop. That's it. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Their body didn't forget that encounter. So one of the things that I like to talk about in my premarital coaching that I do with people, I tell them straight up. I was like, no, if you're going to be working with me, we're going to have a sex conversation.
I think that should be everybody, bro. I really do.
Most people won't, because they don't. I'm like, I need to know, have you slept with somebody already? Have you slept with somebody already? Okay. Where are you in this process? Have y'all slept with each other? Where are you in this process? What does this look like? What are the wounds? Where you ever been pregnant, right? You ever gone through STD? I ask everything. I'm like, and if you did you discuss it? Because if you had an STD, you don't tell your partner, you ain't right for that.
That's foul.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You're not right for that. So again, this whole thing, man, this whole conversation, I'm telling you, man, now I'm not saying that we need to preach this from pulpits, because I don't just for the people watching, I don't think that's appropriate. But I do believe that we should have these in coaching, counseling sessions, in talking to couples. And I do believe that we should teach our young people early that sex is God's design.
Yes.
It's not nasty, but it was meant for a marriage and a covenant, and a commitment that you have to this other person. And it could be an incredibly beautiful thing that's meant for procreation as well as personal enjoyment.
Yeah. And so we're going to react to this next clip, but I just want to add to that. Like, for me personally, man, like, my parents waited an extended period of time before they ever began to have that conversation with me and my brother specifically. I remember the day when Pops, and it was like straight up out the gun, and it seemed like it came out of nowhere for the conversation to happen. But just being honest, and we may have mentioned it at the time, and I know for sure I've mentioned it later. Like, by the time you decided to have that conversation, I had already seen more than enough of what that stuff looked like from illicit places that informed me of what it was, porn, all that kind of stuff, right? So yeah. I've already had, we're talking about it in the hallways with the homeboys in the locker rooms about what's going, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, that's already happened. And so for me, especially as I, be put in a position to be a husband, father, I want to be able to cultivate that and allow that to be such a normal conversation where we are able to come together and collaborate on how to navigate those emotions and feelings in an appropriate, healthy manner, and still honoring, obviously, God and seeing the value of it, and not just telling you, hey, stay away from that. That's grown folk business, right. All that kind of stuff, because then that doesn't really help us in the future. I
think there's an age. And if I had to choose one for a mind to comprehend that level of conversation, or the beginning of it, first of all, I would approach it very carefully with probably more questions about what they have been exposed to, what they know already, what they've heard. And then I would counteract that with truth, right? I would come back to scripture. I'd be like, hey, so let's talk about this. And I would talk about real world stuff in terms of STDs, in terms of things you can't get rid of, in terms of pregnancy, other disease. I know we like to call things soul ties, but I like to just say, again, your soul definitely is going to be committed to somebody who you give your body to. Young men have a tendency to sometimes with the first young lady that they have this encounter with, man, to lose their mind if that relationship doesn't work, because he knows he just can't run about anywhere and have that take place. And so now he's like, well, she ain't with me no more. So and trust me, I've had those kids in front of me too, like literally sitting in front of me. So like I said, we talk about this for like 3 hours because I have had.
And we'll come back. Like, we got so much to unpack on topics like
so much stuff about all of this right here that I've seen as a pastor. I could tell you, man, I've had many conversations around this with people. And so,
No, and we got plenty, man, to unpack and come back and talk about this. This is something that we'll have so many conversations on. But let's wrap this up, man, with these last thoughts that she shares. And actually it's going to hit back to what we were talking about of just what you were informed by versus maybe what you experience or what she experiences in her actual marriage that is so different and freeing. And it's real interesting. So we'll stick around to that.
Provide a PSA on kink. Not to say that you're kinky unless you want to self-identify as that. But
I'd say I'm a sensualist.
Oh, tell me about that.
Well, I saw this. What was that? It was a special on Netflix. It was something that Gwyneth Paltrow did. Did you see that?
Yes.
And
Sex and Goop.
Yes, Sex and Goop. And so I found it really interesting. There was a woman on there who talked about who had different couples on. And it was a couple that a guy who realized he was more kink than anything, black man. And he was kind of like taken aback by it. And his wife was more sensualist, but she hadn't had any orgasms. And he was trying to figure, they were having this like kind of clash in the bedroom sexually. And I remember thinking like, wow, that's a long time for him to feel like he couldn't tell her that.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And a long time for her to not have this wonderful orgasm that she deserved. You know what I mean? And to know your body, for your partner to know your body and you to know your partner's body is the most intimate thing that you can ever experience. And it's supposed to be a safe space.
Yes.
It's supposed to be a safe space for a beautiful thing to happen. And I
very true.
Feel like kink is definitely necessary when it needs to be there, for sure, to whether it's strike a fire or to bring on a spontaneous moment. But I think there's nothing wrong with kink, but I am a sensualist.
Okay, you have to actually educate me right now because I can feel what that word means, but I've actually never heard it before.
So sensualist is somebody whose senses have to be awakened in order for them to really come alive. And I'm all about it smelling good, the lights being low, the music is right, the way you touch, the candle has it's all about that. And when it's like that, I don't know what version of me you're gonna get, but you'll get the best one. And
but that's real, right? Like to actually learn that of your spouse and trying to determine what it is. Would you agree?
Yeah, that was what I was alluding to earlier. I think it's really important, man, that yes, Sean, that we know our spouse, man. It's one of those things again, man. We put taboo around it, as she alluded to, and unfortunately, people get married, man, and it becomes probably one of the most contentious parts of their lives.
Man,
it becomes very contentious,
and it shouldn't be.
And well, it shouldn't be. It becomes one of the most contentious parts, though. They get there's a lot of frustration in that area. There's a lot of struggle. And again, man, I have to be honest with you. People who go into these premarital relations that they have is part of the problem with it on both sides. Because there are women who were used by somebody and then they get with the man and they start saying, well, this is all you want. And he's like, no, that's not all I want. I want you and I want what we have. But because she had these previous encounters with somebody who made their whole relationship was built on that, she's struggling. But yes, to know your spouse, man, to know your spouse's needs on both sides, is something that is a very important thing. But a lot of people, again, we're not talking about this in church. We tell them, y'all pray together, y'all get your hands on your Bible, and Jesus gonna invite him into your bed. I want to do it, make some babies and populate the kingdom. Yes, But now let me stop.
I got organs playing in the background. Don't even trip. Hammond B3.
But what we don't have is the genuine, heartfelt conversations about. It's good that you're praying. It's good that you're doing all that. But communicate. That's your spouse. Talk to them. What do you like? What do you not like? What's uncomfortable for you? What's comfortable?
Not always trying to pray
for you. When we were on the other thing in our other pod, when I was saying, hey, ask them, hey, evening, morning, middle of the night, how do you prefer it? What do you need? You know, she said she need candles, mood, music.
She needs the lights low.
You're not gonna know this, Sean, unless you ask.
Right.
And I'll say this: don't always ask your husband to be the one to ask, and don't always ask your wife. Those two people should meet each other in the middle. They should meet each other in the middle. Have a conversation. Stop being uptight, man. The scripture got people wound up tight to the point where they're like, we're talking about this. I can't believe we're talking about this. Okay. But again, I will say this respectfully, you do have to know who you're married to.
Yeah.
If you got married to somebody, son, who is super, super conservative, you do have to know that this conversation may have to be brought from a completely different angle, because that might be where they came from. And that might not be something that I watched the show years ago. I cannot remember the name of it, but it's this religious group. Their whole thing is they only come together for procreation attempts. Real talk. And it has to be dark, and they're never fully undressed. But that's the only reason why they real talk. So I'll have to look this up. We watched a documentary on this group.
What?
And but that's really,
Lord, please, Lord.
So you have to know. I'm not saying that for Christians, but I'm just saying you have to know who this person is, how they came. And this is the other reason why premarital counseling is important, Sean, because you need to know. Listen, you need to know ahead of time who this person is and what their history is. Because if you don't know their history, you're going to marry somebody you're frustrated with, because even though you love them, you might be frustrated in this area of intimacy because you do not know what they've been through or what they, have experienced and how that impacts them and the way that they see sex.
Yeah. And so last thought, and then we'll get to the actual clip and we'll wrap up. What would you say that those conversations should be reserved only for the time being of, hey, we've decided to commit to one another for marriage? Because I know that there's a possibility that, hearing these thoughts, they're like, man, I should ask maybe somebody that I'm courting then. But is that doesn't really apply there, do you think?
I once there is an engagement.
Okay.
Yes. Prior to an engagement.
That don't even need to be on nobody's table.
No. It's inappropriate because you're going to now here's what I do believe you can ask in a pre-engagement courting relationship.
Okay.
Have you been intimate with other people already?
No, that's a good question.
100%. Because then you can say to yourself too, because here's what you can't do. You can't be like, well, go through this whole process and then propose. And then that person's like, yeah, I was out there, I did this, that, other. And you're like, oh, shoot, I'm pulling that back. I'm pulling that proposal back. Right. Or you said yes to the proposal. And then you hear how many people he slept with in the streets. Y'all call it bodies. Right. Y'all be like, how many bodies? And now all of a sudden you want to pull that back. So you're now saying you're damaged goods all because you had this going. So I do believe that where that conversation or a portion of that conversation is appropriate is to find out whether or not this person has been sexually active and or promiscuous, period, in that relationship. So then you can make an educated decision for your life and the way that you want to live that and who you want to go and be in a relationship with.
Yeah.
But prior to that, no.
Cool. Yeah. So I thought that was a really
and I think that you should do that with somebody like myself or a therapist or a marriage counselor or something along those lines. And I don't think you should talk to somebody about that who's not married. I think that it should be somebody who's married or has been married that's in that space, because a person who's not married, they might have knowledge, but they don't have nuance. Does that make sense?
1000%.
So
I fall
I
in that
think,
category. So don't come to me, come to PD. That's it.
yeah,
But
but I'm not specifically talking about you. I'm just saying in general, right?
Yeah.
It's like going to get some help from somebody who just kind of graduated in finance, but has never actually done a deal. The person,
different. Yeah.
you understand what I'm saying?
Definitely.
The person who also has a finance degree, but has also been doing it for 15 years and has done many different deals, has so much more to lend to you than this other person who's like, well, let me look this up. Well, here's what I think. Well, no, because life is nuanced as well. There's a lot of different things. And I think that the conversation can be better served when you have it in that light with somebody who's been there and they have the background for you to talk about it. A person who's never been intimate with anybody and never had to go through that challenge of a relationship like that, they're not going to have the skill set and the ability to have an appropriate conversation with just going to build anything.
Yeah. I can't lead you somewhere I haven't been.
You can't. You can give me some framework.
Right.
You 100% can give me some framework, right? You can call a person and, hey, listen, there might be some things you need to understand. So we don't want to discount that wisdom. But if you're going to go further into that, you need to have that conversation once you've decided this person is going to be my spouse. You understand their sexual history prior to that. And then you get into that conversation, because that conversation needs to be monitored for different points of views from both people. And then it could be healthier.
Yeah. So I love that. So let's get to this last part, because there's something huge that we've kind of been hinting at throughout this whole conversation, that hearing this the first time, like, really just continued to solidify an even greater level why I am making the decision to wait, because this is some serious stuff in my humble opinion.
It's real. When all of my senses are awakened, I'm scared of what I'm gonna do.
Is it important for people to identify?
Not even scared of what I'm gonna do. I'm just alive.
Yes. Because when you are a sensualist, did it take you a while to figure that out and put a name to it and describe to your partner, like, this is some of the reasons why I may not be as open in certain moments?
Yes, absolutely. And I realized that, like, in some ways I had to, like, turn that on too and show it to him, so happy. This is such a healthy conversation. It was a specific toy I remember buying. And I remember I was so excited about this toy. And I told him about this particular toy. And he was like, all right. And so we discussed it, talked about it. I'll have to tell you the whole story off camera, because that I can't share. But I just remember him saying, that was nice. I'm glad you added that.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So it's like, I think that even toys are sometimes things like you don't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite places to go is Pleasure Chest on Sunset.
Yes.
Like, just to go on just like random nights. Why not? Have fun. Like, it's fun. Sex is supposed to be fun.
I love that too, because some people can think sensualist as seriousist. Like,
no,
it has to be this like very serious, very spiritual thing.
No. But it's got to smell good in there. The lighting got to be right. I want you to whisper the right thing in my ear, and I am all yours.
I love that I want to go back to that scenario clip, in that she talked about affirmations versus dirty talk. And that's the beautiful thing about having these dialogues, is that people say things to me that I've never thought of before. Mm-hmm. Like, I've talked so much ad nausea about dirty talk, but affirmative talk, like, that's something so different, that we don't have to take on this masculine or feminine role. It's not submission and dominance. It's just worthiness. It's seeing the other person where they're at. Do you have like a specific thing for you that you learned about sex that has been like, that's a way I never thought about it before, but that feels right for me?
I think when I was younger, it was, it's about like positions more so. It was, if you ride, you're a freak. That is far from the truth. If you ride, you're free. You know what I mean? Like, it was more so like things like that. I remember hearing, like, the rules, like, even when it comes to so many oral sex, like all these different things, like, people were so, I just got the wrong information. I got all the wrong information. And I thought that for a long time I was so close-minded. So when you start having all these conversations and you're like, really? And you get more information or you read about it and you just become enlightened. I think that no one should be closed-minded. I think that no one should judge. I think that, sex is as fun as you want it to be.
I love that about this movie too, because.
Okay. So that's pretty much it. And that's really, for me, like, that right there was like the cherry on top of this whole conversation for me, because she kind of, obviously, we just heard, goes into detail with maybe a story or experiences, things like that. But two things. One, the perception that she had growing up, what she heard, how people viewed it. And then obviously when she got into those spaces with her husband or relationships that she may have encountered prior to, where she's like, yo, like, no, it's a different story. But it's more of having that ability to communicate that and having that ability to understand that you are connecting with this person. So intimacy requires that level of conversation and vulnerability, transparency, and trusting one another with your bodies, to bring that level of pleasure to the bedroom and in the marriage space. And so for me, this was a thought that I wrote down in my notes, man. I was listening to this and I went to my notes because I was like, man, I gotta record some of this. And here's what I've learned. It's that right there that I think proves, without her even going in that direction, I think it proves how illegitimate one night stands are and how illegitimate it is to engage premaritally with somebody. And here's kind of what I thought. Well, one, obviously we know from the biblical standpoint that they aren't able to maximize it because they're outside of God's will, right? They're not in the space where it can be fully enjoyed as God designed it. And on top of that, what's interesting is God designed literally the orgasm that human beings can experience.
Oh, of course.
So like the pleasure that you receive from that, obviously in the right spaces, like if that is it, God designed that. Imagine what it's like, and not saying to the extent of sexual feelings or anything, but imagine just obviously the experience of joy and abundance of life that you get from being with the one who created it. You know what I mean? Like that's a whole different level. And I think Jackie Hill Perry brought that up, and I thought that was phenomenal when she said that. But outside of that, here's what I came to the conclusion of is that most people judge someone based on their sexual experience or encounter, the one night stand that they have, right? And aren't even getting legitimate sex because they are giving what they think the person they are being sexually active with, right? They think they're giving them what they're wanting or what they're expecting instead of giving what's most pleasurable and desired. So furthermore, what's most desired between anybody is intimacy, not intensity. And we talked about that in the previous pod.
We did.
Yeah.
Which is a whole nother thing, Sean. And that's the thing, right? I alluded to that, maybe 20 minutes or so ago. You're not getting the intimacy, the sex, the fulfillment that you want out of the encounter. Because you haven't opened your mouth to say what you want. You haven't opened your mouth to say what you need. So that happens even afterwards. So you go out and you have those one night stands. You have this shadow of a relationship, which is damaging you because, again, let's be honest, ladies, the more people that you sleep with, the less inclined a man is to be like, I'm about to wife her. I'm just being honest with you. That's just the way that it is. When it comes to that, a lot of dudes be like, I know we asked this on another platform and some of the guys are like, depends. No, brother, as soon as she be like, yeah, I was busting it open for everybody, you're going to be like, oh, shoot. Like, because you start thinking to yourself, man, I might run into one of these brothers somewhere in the street. This brother looking at me like, what up, man? And you just know. He give you that nod like, boy, you could. Like, you wipe that up, huh? Yeah, I mean, just be honest. That's just the way that it is. But in general, I think that, again, man, good, healthy communication and conversation around this area is important. And the church, and when I say the church, I'm not talking about the pastor on Sunday morning. I am saying in their supplemental ministries, in their young adult ministries, they need to be having conversations around the fact that God created sex, orgasm, all these kind of things, and that those two people need to understand the purpose of it as opposed to just being told that it is the worst thing in the world.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's a really good sobering reminder for me of really me being actually just, I think, being even more appreciative of me obviously waiting till marriage to experience that and holding on to the virginity, because like that to come into that space and not have anybody to compare it to. And we've had those conversations before. That's a beautiful thing, and something that really is supposed to be treasured. And then I'm able to spend the rest of my life in that space, building that with the other person. And I think that's and having more of these conversations. And as we grow, we have maybe likings that maybe shift, change, whatever. And we continue to have that conversation to connect and to actually be intimate in a longevity sense in the relationship. And so, and in reference to that conversation that we had, that was a really good one. And I think, one of the things that I think, was brought to the attention that I think is there's room for that. And I'm not saying that's not what you were not saying in saying that, but I think, there can be some instances, where they aren't the same as they once were. And it's not to say that you don't take those things into consideration, like you just walk in there blindly. But you know, if that person, that could be, it's possible that God could align a relationship for you where somebody does have a very interesting sexual history, nothing that would hopefully harm you or put you in danger. You know what I'm saying? But depending on who that person is now, it's possible. Like,
listen,
and I don't
anything
know
is possible.
Yeah,
So I
anything
definitely
is-
wasn't
Yeah.
removing the possibility.
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell you that I know. Well, let me speak for myself.
Sure.
If it's me, and at least the dudes that I know, the dudes I hang out with, but again, you got to remember, I'm 54.
Yeah.
So I don't even feel like I just come from old school. I just know dudes that I know, they'd have been like, nah, man, I'm good. And even
and I feel that too. Like knowing she was kind of around the group. Yeah.
mentally,
I feel that.
I could tell you, I be thinking, we cruising around this city. I'm be somewhere, we out, some dude looking at me like, bruh, you have no idea. I know in my
Yeah, it's an issue.
I know in my mind.
It's a reservation.
But could it happen? 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, that goes for anybody who comes to Christ, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Dude, your whole past, right? You come with that whole past. That
Restoration, man.
The
That's
whole thing, restoration, right?
Yeah.
And so it is possible. I'm telling you, it's a large mountain for some people to climb. And they just like, man, they look at the top of that hill and they be like, boy,
yeah. And you can't expect people to just drop and forget all that you may have explained to them and just say, hey, I'm a new person. You shouldn't hold that like that. You can't do that. You know, you can't do that. So, you got to respect and honor that. So for sure, man. So I think this was really good, man. And I know there's so many more conversations like this on the horizon over here, man, regarding this. So hope you guys got a lot of thoughts, intriguing perspectives and suggestions out of this. If you want to hear more and you like this kind of content, be sure to subscribe, like this video, share with a friend who could get some education on some sex and some perspectives, of course, as we're here to continue to react to cultural viral clips.
Healthy perspectives,
absolutely healthy perspectives. Man, you know, so you stick around, continue hearing our thoughts on and reactions to clips that we'll catch and just putting some really healthy perspectives and insights to them, obviously centered on bringing Christ to culture and having really good conversations. So we appreciate you guys so much for tuning into this video. Hope you got a lot out of it. And until the next conversation, be easy and be breezy. Peace.